back in about back in about 2014, I believe it was, when Disney announced that it was creating a sequel trilogy that was not going to be based on any of the current material that was available. uh, was kind of disappointing to a lot. The not having it all be canon anymore was more of a big blow to a lot of people, such as myself. We grew up on this. This was part of our Star Wars lexicon. This is what we knew. Basically, anything we knew about Star Wars outside of the movies and a few other TV shows and stuff, it became basically our lore of Star Wars. Now, we are years later. There are people out there who want to get involved in the canon. Or not the canon, sorry, that's what I'm going to be talking about. They want to get involved in the Star Wars expanded universe. But if you've never really explored this, you're going to find it can look extremely overwhelming, possibly even a little intimidating. So my goal here is to create videos where I'm going to break this down, try to keep it under 10 minutes on short little parts of the Star Wars EU. For this particular episode, we're going to talk about the Tiers of Canon. Now, what does Tiers of Canon mean? Pretty much every other IP out there, famous one, most of them do not recognize other media types. The Predator movies do not go with the books or the games. Aliens, same thing. Star Trek, pretty much the same thing. Pretty much Stargate, any IP like that. Star Wars was different. Star Wars had a hierarchy of what is canon and what is not. And there's actually a really good reason for this. And I'm going to do this in a later video. There was a time when there was nothing officially referred to as the expanded universe until about the time of the Thrawn trilogy came out with Heir to the Empire. And that's when the hierarchies of canon started. Now we'll get into that in the future, but you'll get a brief idea of it here. So let's go through. What are the tiers of canon? What are they? What do they mean? What are their rank? Where do they rank in order? So let's start with this. The top one is G canon, also known as George Lucas canon. What this basically consists of is the 6 episodes, notes, basically whatever George Lucas wrote down, the scripts, the screenplays, things of that nature. So at the time this was made, it was just the 6 movies that were in the theater, that went to theater. Those were the only real G canon. Those were the only G canon at the time. This does not include droids, Ewoks cartoons. It does not include the Star Wars Holiday Special. It does not include any of those things. The Ewoks movies, none of that. None of those are considered part of G canon. They are actually regulated to lesser levels of canon. And if you want to know, and we will get into Star Wars, the Clone Wars versus the animated Clone Wars by, I don't know how to say their name. I think it was the TAS. Anyway, the little short ones that appeared on, I believe, the Cartoon Network. I'm not even going to try and say the person's name. That's where it is. And then you have the next level, then you have the next tier that was there and was secondary. It was the second tier until the certain other canon came along. C canon. C canon is, for a short way to say it, the books by Bantam Del Rey and the Dark Horse comic books when they owned the rights to Star Wars. Dark Horse claimed the rights of Star Wars got the rights to Star Wars after Marvel had ended their run and their license had expired back in the 80s, 90s era. And that is a subject we'll get to. So here's the thing though. Things in C canon can be elevated to G canon, but not necessarily all of it. Not necessarily the whole book can be done that way. So for example, short example, Coruscant was not really used before it was written down. Now, Coruscant, I believe, was the first one they came up with when they said in Heir to the Empire. Quinlan Vos, Secura, the YT 2400. So there's a lot of things. And a lot of this is when the prequels came out, Coruscant being confirmed as where the New Republic and the Empire would be, elevated that to G canon. Quinlan Vos was elevated when he was mentioned in Revenge of the Sith. The YT 2400 was brought up to G canon when George Lucas did the Star Wars A New Hope special editions. So already this gets a little confusing. Some things can be elevated up to G canon. Actually, things can be up to G canon all the way if, at the time, George Lucas approved it. Basically in something that he created on his movies. So if it was added in or it was part of the prequels to bring that up, it's elevated up to the new canon. Nothing in G canon can be downgraded. G canon is the end-all be-all. And C canon is really where you're going to find the vast majority of the confusion in how to read Star Wars in a effective way without being totally confused. This is where things get into the tricky area. You have S canon, D canon, non-canon. Okay, basically secondary canon, this is an area where it's a little tricky. For example, Splinter of the Mind's Eye could arguably go one way or the other. And that's been a topic of discussion, and that was technically the first sequel novel from the Star Wars movie written by Alan Dean Foster. The Marvel comics, when they had the rights, the 3D comic that was made, the UK old comics, the comic strips that were created, those would be most of S canon. Very, very little of that actually has been elevated up to G canon or C canon, and I'm not 100% sure if any of it has ever been elevated to G canon. D canon is I don't even know why they still had it. It should have fallen under non-canon. It's really pointless. You don't need to worry about it. It was basically about material from Star Wars Detours, and it never got released. And if anything, you don't need it. You'd go down to N canon. N canon is basically Star Wars Tales. Any adventures that were done in the Star Wars Tales or anything that just goes completely outside of continuity of the higher canons, or is just basically like fanboy stuff. If you do fanboy stuff, that's what you have. So your last canon that I'm going to talk about, and I'm not going to go into this too much, is T canon. This is where canon gets really screwy if you try to use T canon in your working and navigating, because T canon will drive you insane, because it includes pretty much anything that happened, like Clone Wars. So the Clone Wars series by Dave Filoni is considered T canon. So it is actually considered higher than even the Ewok movies. So how do you need to navigate this easily? For the most part, focus on G and C canon. S canon is really not needed. T canon you can really just wipe out completely if you do not want to try and have Ahsoka kind of squeezed into the EU later, after the fact. That's kind of what I do. And by the way, despite anything anybody says, there is nothing wrong if you create your own canon layout. Just because there is everything, there is always canon that you can make and decide, this is what I want, this is what I like. And the good thing is you don't need everything. And I'm going to get into that in another video. Until then, we're at 10 minutes. We're after 10 minutes. You all have a blessed one. May the force be with you.